There is a hand somewhere in this room right now, holding on to something it cannot put down. Maybe it is holding a memory, a version of a conversation that ended wrong, a person who is no longer here, or who is here but different now, a version of yourself you used to be and cannot find the way back to. Whatever it is holding, the hand is tired. Most of us think letting go means forgetting, deleting the memory, making the ache disappear like it never happened. And because we cannot do that, because the memory stays no matter how hard we try to erase it, we decide we have failed. We decide we are simply someone who cannot let go. That is not what letting go means. Letting go is not deleting the memory. It is not becoming someone who never felt any of it. Letting go is something much smaller, much quieter than that. It is the hand, finally, opening. Tonight is built around 20 old stories. Some come from ancient monasteries. Some come from villages nobody wrote down the name of. Some come from a single sentence a wandering teacher once said to a stranger on a road. They are old, but they are not really about the past. They are about a hand that will not open, and what it takes, gently, slowly, for it to finally rest open on its own. We will move through 5 kinds of holding tonight. The grip of anger, the story we keep replaying to prove we were right and someone else was wrong. The grip of control, the exhausting work of trying to force a river to bend where we want it to go. The grip of grief, the past we carry like a stone in the chest, certain that if we ever set it down, we are somehow abandoning what we lost. The grip of the self, the quiet, endless project of trying to be someone worth keeping. And at the end, something softer. What it actually feels like when a hand opens on its own, without being forced. You do not need to understand any of this yet. You do not need to do anything right now except listen. Here is the part almost no one tells you. The thing you are holding on to so tightly, it stopped protecting you a long time ago. It is not keeping you safe anymore. It is the thing quietly wearing you down while you sleep, while you drive, while you sit in rooms pretending to listen to people you love. You have been drinking something bitter every day, hoping it would hurt someone else. It never does. It only ever reaches you. This is not a video that will tell you to just let it go, as if it were that simple, as if you had not already tried. It will not rush you. It will not hand you a lesson and expect you to feel better by morning. It is going to sit here with you in the dark, the way an old friend sits with you when there is nothing left to say, and just be present while you carry what you are carrying, for a little while longer, until it starts, on its own, to feel a little lighter. Everything you have lost has left a space behind, an empty place where something used to be. And that space is not empty because something is missing from your life. It is empty because it is waiting. It cannot hold anything new until what is old inside it is finally allowed to leave. So for the next few hours, there is nothing to solve and nothing to fix. There is only this. 20 small stories about hands that would not open, and what finally, quietly, made them. Let your body sink into wherever you are lying right now. Let your shoulders drop from your ears. You do not have to hold anything up tonight, not even yourself. We begin with anger, the oldest grip of all. The monk who broke the rule walked home with empty hands. The monk who followed every rule perfectly carried something heavy for 5 more miles and never once noticed he had picked it up. This is a story about 2 monks named Tanzan and Ekido. They were traveling together down a muddy road, the kind of road that comes after days of rain. Mud pulled at their sandals with every step. The air smelled like wet earth and old leaves. Neither of them spoke much. Walking in silence was easy between the 2 of them. It had been easy for years. At the edge of the road, a stream had swollen with the rain. What was normally a small crossing, a few stones, a quick step, had become something else. Fast water, a current strong enough to matter. A young woman stood at the edge of it. Her kimono was silk, the good kind, the kind that does not survive being soaked through. She was looking at the water the way you look at something you cannot cross and cannot walk away from either. Stuck between 2 impossible choices, Tanzan did not think about it for very long. He walked over, lifted her without a word, and carried her across the current. On the other side, he set her down gently. She thanked him. He nodded. Then he kept walking, like it was nothing, like it was already over. Ekido said nothing. Not then. They walked for hours after that. The road dried out slowly under a pale sun. The trees changed. The light changed. And still, Ekido said nothing, though something in him had clearly not moved on the way his feet had. It was evening by the time he finally spoke. "We are not supposed to go near women," he said. His voice was tight, like it had been holding this in for a long time. Especially not young ones. Especially not like that. What you did back there, it was dangerous. It was against everything we practice. Tanzan looked at him. There was no defensiveness in his face. No guilt either. "I set the girl down back at the river," he said. "Are you still carrying her?" Ekido did not have an answer for that. Because the truth was, he had been carrying her the entire walk. Not the actual woman. The story of her. The version of the moment he had built in his head. The one he kept replaying. The one that got a little heavier every mile. Tanzan had touched her for maybe 10 seconds and let her go. Ekido had been holding her for 5 hours. This is something most of us know, even if we have never said it out loud. We are so afraid of being the person who did the wrong thing, that we become the person who cannot stop thinking about it. We watch someone move on from something, and it almost bothers us more than the thing itself. How are they so calm? How are they already fine? Meanwhile, we are still back there, at the river, replaying it. Anger works exactly like this. So does resentment. So does the version of a conversation we keep rewriting in our heads at 2 in the morning, giving ourselves better lines, giving the other person worse ones, trying to win an argument that ended weeks ago and that the other person probably forgot about by dinner. The moment itself is rarely the heavy part. It is what we do after the moment that makes it heavy. We pick it up. We carry it. We add to it every time we go back and look at it again. Tanzan was not more disciplined than Ekido. He was not more spiritually advanced, or somehow above temptation, or immune to what Ekido feared. He simply did the thing, and then let the thing be done. He did not go back for it. He did not turn it over in his hands on the walk home, checking it from every angle, wondering what it meant about him. Ekido had followed every rule, and it was Ekido who arrived home exhausted, worn down by a woman he had carried across no water at all. Most of us have a river we crossed a long time ago. Something someone said. Something we did. Something done to us that we did not deserve and never got an apology for. The moment passed in seconds. We have been carrying it in our arms for years. Here is the part worth sitting with tonight. You do not have to forgive anyone to put something down. You do not have to decide it was fine, or that it did not matter, or that you were wrong to be hurt by it. Tanzan never said the woman did not matter. He simply did not need to keep holding her to prove that she had. Letting go of anger is not the same as saying it was okay. It is closer to this. You already crossed the river. Whatever happened, happened, and it is finished happening. The only thing still moving is you, walking home in the dark, arms full of something that is no longer there. Somewhere behind you, on a road you already passed, there is a version of you standing at the edge of a river, still holding on. You can set it down there. You do not have to bring it the rest of the way home. You crossed your own river once, maybe more than once. And if you are anything like most people, somewhere on the other side of it, you are still angry at someone. There is a story about a man crossing a river in a small boat. He is going somewhere. It does not matter where. What matters is that the river is wide, and the crossing takes time, and he has been on the water long enough to fall into that particular kind of quiet that comes with rowing alone. Then it happens. Another boat, drifting, comes straight into the side of his. The impact is not violent. It is more of a bump, a jolt, water splashing over the edge. But it is enough. Something in him ignites instantly, before he even turns his head. He is already shouting before he sees who did this to him. Watch where you are going. Who taught you how to row a boat? He is furious. The kind of furious that arrives faster than thought. The kind that feels completely justified the second it appears. He turns to face the other boat. There is no one in it. The boat had slipped its rope somewhere upstream. It had been drifting, empty, carried by nothing but the current, going nowhere on purpose, because it was not being steered by anyone at all. It was never trying to hit him. It was never trying to do anything. It was simply a boat, moving where the water moved it. And here is the strange part. The man's anger does not slowly fade with this new information. It disappears. Instantly. Completely. Not because the boat apologized. Not because he decided to be the bigger person. It disappears because there was never anyone there to be angry at in the first place. The anger had nowhere left to stand. Sit with that for a second. The same boat. The same bump. The same jolt of water over the edge. Nothing about the collision itself changed. Only one thing changed, and it changed everything. Whether or not there was a person inside. This is worth being honest about, because most of us have never noticed it in ourselves. Anger does not usually come from what happened to us. It comes from the story we build, almost instantly, about who did it to us, and why, and what it says about how much they respect us, or love us, or think about us at all. The bump is small. The story we build around it is enormous. Think about the last time you were furious at someone in traffic. It was never really about the car cutting you off. It was about the version of that driver you built in your head in half a second. The one who saw you, who did not care, who thought you did not matter enough to check their mirror. You were not angry at a car. You were angry at a person you invented. Most of the boats that hit us in life are emptier than we think. The colleague who did not reply to your message was not thinking about you at all. They were drowning in their own week. The friend who forgot to call was not weighing your friendship and finding it unimportant. They were exhausted, distracted, carrying something you cannot see from where you are standing. The person who hurt you years ago, the one you still replay conversations with, was very likely not steering towards you on purpose. They were adrift in their own current. The way we all are sometimes, bumping into people without meaning to, without even noticing they did. This does not mean nothing ever really happens to us. Some boats do have someone rowing them. Some harm is intentional, and it is allowed to hurt, and it does not need to be excused away. That is not what this story is asking you to do. It is asking something smaller. Before you build the whole story, before you decide exactly what this person meant by it and what it says about you, it is worth asking one quiet question. Is there really someone in that boat? Or is this an empty one, drifting, and you have been standing in the water shouting at no one for longer than you realized? The anger you are still carrying tonight, some of it belongs somewhere. It has a name attached to it, a real choice someone made, and you are allowed to feel what you feel about that. But some of it, if you are honest, has been aimed at an empty boat for a very long time. You do not have to forgive the river for having currents. You only have to notice which boats were ever steered at all. A man screamed at an old teacher for the better part of an hour, called him useless, called him a fraud, called him things that would follow most people home and sit at their dinner table for a week. The old teacher said nothing back. He just listened, the way you listen to rain on a roof. And when the man finally ran out of breath, it was the old teacher who walked away lighter, and the man who was left standing there, still full of everything he had just thrown. This is a story about an old teacher who lived at the edge of a village, in a small house with a garden he tended every morning before anyone else was awake. People came to him with real questions, grief they did not know how to carry, fear about a future they could not see the shape of, what to do with a life that had quietly stopped looking like what they hoped it would be. He answered slowly, carefully, the way you would hand someone something fragile. He never rushed an answer. He never seemed to need to be right. One day, a man arrived who was not looking for an answer. He had heard about the teacher's reputation, the way people spoke of him with a kind of quiet respect, and something in him could not stand it. Maybe he was having a hard year. Maybe he had been humiliated somewhere else that morning, in some other room, by someone he could not talk back to, and needed a place to finally put it down. We do not know his reasons. We rarely do. With people like this, anger like that usually has a longer story behind it than the 5 minutes we are standing inside of. He started shouting the moment he arrived. He called the teacher a liar, said his wisdom was empty performance, a trick for people too weak or too foolish to think for themselves. He kept going. Insult after insult, each one aimed a little lower than the last. Testing, searching for the place that would finally land and do damage. The old teacher sat there in the doorway of his own home. His face did not change. He did not lean forward to defend himself. He did not raise his voice to match the other man's, the way most of us instinctively would, matching heat with heat until the whole thing catches fire. He simply waited. The way you wait out a storm you already know will eventually run out of rain, because storms always do. The man's voice grew louder. His face grew redder. And still, nothing in the old teacher moved. When the man finally stopped, chest heaving, out of breath, out of words, there was a long silence between them. Just the sound of wind somewhere in the garden. The kind of silence that feels louder than the shouting that came before it. Then the old teacher asked him a question. If someone offers you a gift, he said, and you do not accept it, who does the gift belong to? The man frowned, thrown off balance by the strangeness of it. It would still belong to the one who tried to give it, he said slowly. It never left his hands. Then I do not accept your gift, the teacher said. You may keep it. Sit with this for a moment, because most of us have never once thought of insults this way. We tend to believe that when someone throws anger at us, it becomes ours the instant it leaves their mouth. We catch it automatically, the way you flinch and catch a ball thrown at your face without deciding to. We carry it home. We turn it over that night, and the next night, wondering if it is true, wondering what it says about us, wondering why they said it, wondering if some small part of us deserved it. But an insult, like a gift, requires two hands. One to offer it, one to accept it. You cannot control what someone throws at you. People will offer you their anger your whole life, in restaurants and meetings and family dinners and comment sections. Some of it will genuinely be about you. Most of it, if you are honest, will actually be about them. About a bad year, an old wound that never closed properly, a version of themselves they cannot stand, that they are trying to hand to someone else so they do not have to hold it alone for one more night. What you can control is your hands, whether they open to catch it or stay exactly where they are. This does not mean you stop feeling things. The old teacher was not made of stone. Somewhere in him, the words probably registered. Maybe they even stung. For a second, the way words do. Even words we know are not true. The difference was not that he felt nothing. The difference was that he did not pick it up afterward and carry it out the door with him into the rest of his evening. Most of us are still walking around holding gifts we never actually agreed to accept. A comment someone made in an argument years ago that we can still quote word for word. A label a parent used once, in a moment of their own exhaustion, that somehow became a permanent part of how we see ourselves. A cruel thing a stranger said from behind a screen, about a life they know nothing about, that we have somehow let move into a room in our mind and stay there, rent-free. For years, none of it had to become ours. It became ours the moment we reached out and took it. Here is the part worth remembering the next time someone hands you their anger, their contempt, their worst moment, and expects you to carry it home with you the way the man expected the old teacher to. You are allowed to simply not take it. not because you are pretending it was never said, not because you are too weak to feel hurt by it, but because you have finally learned the difference between something being offered to you and something belonging to you. The man who screamed for an hour left with everything he arrived with, still in his own hands, heavier now, because no one had lifted it from him the way he had wanted them to. The old teacher went back inside and finished his tea, still warm, exactly where he had left it. There is a kind of quiet some people carry, not because nothing ever reaches them, but because they have simply stopped opening their hands for everything that is thrown their way. He carried a light through the dark every night for years, certain it was working. It had gone out months ago, and he never once knew. There is a story about a blind man who went to visit an old friend. They sat together for hours, the way old friends do, talking about nothing in particular, letting the evening pass without noticing it passing. By the time the blind man stood to leave, it was fully dark outside. His friend went to the door and picked up a lantern, already lit, and held it out to him. "Take this with you," the friend said. The blind man almost laughed. "I do not need a lantern," he said. "Dark or light, it makes no difference to me. I have walked this road home 100 times without ever seeing it. I know you do not need it to find your way," the friend said. "But if you walk home without it, someone else might not see you coming. They might walk straight into you in the dark." The blind man thought about this for a moment and understood. He was not being asked to carry the light for himself. He was being asked to carry it for everyone else on the road, so that no one collided with him without warning. It made sense to him. He took the lantern and thanked his friend and stepped out into the night. He had not walked far when someone crashed into him, hard enough to knock him back a step. He was startled, then irritated. The kind of irritation that arrives instantly, before thought has time to catch up with it. "Watch where you are going," he said sharply. "Can you not see this lantern I am carrying?" The stranger stood there for a second, confused. Then, gently, almost apologetically, he said, "Friend, your candle burned out a long time ago. You have been walking in the dark this whole way." The blind man had been carrying an unlit lantern the entire time, and there was no way for him to have known. Sit with that for a moment, because most of us are carrying something similar, and we do not know it either after we have been hurt. Most of us build something to protect ourselves and to warn other people away from doing it again. A wall, a sharper tone, a guardedness that shows up automatically whenever someone gets close to whatever the old wound was. We believe we are still carrying that light, still visibly cautious, still clearly signaling, "Do not do that to me again." We assume the people around us can see it the way we can feel it. But here is the difficult part. We cannot always tell, from the inside, whether our own light is still lit. Sometimes, the wall we built years ago to protect ourselves has quietly stopped protecting us and started only isolating us instead. And we have no way of feeling that shift happening, because it does not announce itself. Sometimes, the caution we carry has burned down to nothing, has become nothing but a habit we go through the motions of, and we are the last ones to find out. We keep expecting people to see the warning we think we are giving off. We keep getting hurt, bumped into, misunderstood, and we get angry about it, the exact way the blind man did. Can you not see what I am carrying? Can you not see what I have been through And most of the time, the truth is closer to what the stranger said. Not that no one cares, simply that the light went out a while ago, and no one told us, because no one else could see that either. We have been walking around in the dark, certain we were visible, certain our defenses were doing their job, and getting hurt anyway, and mistaking that hurt for proof that people are careless, when really it might just be proof that we cannot always see our own flame from where we are standing. This is worth being gentle with yourself about tonight. If you have been getting angry lately at people who do not seem to see your pain, who do not seem to be handling you carefully enough, who keep bumping into something in you that you thought was clearly marked, it might not be that they are careless. It might simply be that the light burned out somewhere along the way. Quietly, without either of you noticing, the blind man did not need the lantern to see. He needed it so others could see him. And there is a kind of holding on that works exactly like that. We carry old hurt like a lantern, certain it is still lighting the way, still warning people, still doing its job. And somewhere back down the road, without us ever feeling it happen, the flame went out, and we have just been carrying the shape of it since. You cannot always tell from the inside whether what you are holding on to is still doing anything at all. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is stop, right there in the dark, and simply set the lantern down. Anger has a face. You can point at it. You can say, this person, this moment, this is where it started. Control is quieter than that. It does not feel like holding a grudge. It feels like being responsible, like being the one who has to keep checking, keep planning, keep 3 steps ahead. Because if you stop, for even a moment, something will fall apart, and it will be your fault for not seeing it coming. Most of us do not call this a grip. We call it being careful. We call it not wanting to be caught off guard again. But underneath it is the same tired hand from before, still closed, still working, just holding something different now. Not a memory of what already happened, a fear of what has not happened yet. There is a story about an old man who understood something most of us spend our whole lives trying to learn the hard way. He lost the only horse he owned, and said maybe. He gained a second horse for free, and said maybe. His son broke his leg, and he said maybe. And when the army came through his village taking every able-bodied young man to war, his son stayed home, alive, because of that broken leg. He said maybe to that too. There is a story about an old farmer who lived near the northern border, in a village where the land was poor and the winters came early. He kept horses. Not many, just enough to work the fields and carry goods to market. One of them, a strong grey gelding, had been with him longer than most of his neighbors' marriages had lasted. It was, by any measure, the most valuable thing he owned. One morning, the gate to the horse pen was open. No one knew how. Maybe the latch had worn loose. Maybe the wind had done it. The horse was gone, its hoofprints leading north, past the last fence post, past the last field anyone in the village bothered to walk, into the wild grassland that belonged to no one and to everyone who was strong enough to cross it. The village gathered at his door that evening, the way villages do when something bad has happened to one of their own. They shook their heads. They spoke in the low, careful voices people use around a loss. "What terrible luck," they said. Your best horse. Gone. Just like that. How will you manage the harvest now? How unfortunate for you. Old friend. The old man was sitting outside his door, mending a piece of rope that did not need much mending. He did not look up right away. Maybe, he said. They frowned at him. It was strange. This word, offered instead of grief. Some thought he had not understood. Others thought he was simply too old, too tired, to feel the loss the way a younger man would have. They went home confused and a little bothered, the way we sometimes are when someone refuses to be as upset as we think the situation requires. 3 weeks passed. The old man kept working his fields alone, slower now, without the horse to help pull the plow. He did not complain. He did not seem to be waiting for anything either. Then, one morning, hoofbeats. The grey gelding came trotting back down the same path it had disappeared on, and it was not alone. Behind it came a second horse, a wild one, its coat thick and unbrushed, its eyes still holding something of the open grassland in them. It had followed the gelding home, the way animals sometimes follow each other without any reason we can name. The village gathered again, faster this time, buzzing with the kind of excitement good news brings. 2 horses now, they said. 1 free, out of nothing, out of a disaster that turned out to be the opposite of a disaster. What tremendous luck! How fortunate you are. The old man looked at the new horse for a long moment. Wild, strong, worth more than anything else in the village. Maybe, he said again. This time the frustration in the crowd was sharper. It felt almost like an insult, refusing to celebrate something this obviously good. A few of them walked away, shaking their heads at him. The way you shake your head at someone who seems determined to find the cloud inside every silver lining, who cannot simply let a good thing be good. But the old man was not being difficult. He had simply noticed something the rest of them had not yet had time to learn. That the story was not finished. That it is never finished. That the moment we decide something is the good ending or the bad ending is usually just the moment we got tired of waiting to see what happens next. His son, young and proud of the new horse, began trying to break it, the way young men do, certain of their own strength, certain the animal would come to respect him, the way it seemed to respect no one else. He worked with it for days. Then one morning, in front of half the village, the horse reared without warning, and the boy was thrown hard onto the packed dirt of the yard. His leg broke, badly, in a way that would leave him limping for the rest of his life. The village came to the door again. This time there was no confusion in their voices, only a kind of grim certainty. See, they said, this is what comes of a stroke of luck like that. The horse was never a gift. It was always going to cost you something. How unfortunate that your only son should be crippled like this, right when you needed him most for the harvest. The old man sat with his son that night, cleaning the wound, wrapping the leg as best he knew how, while the boy gritted his teeth and said nothing. In the morning, when the neighbors asked him how he was bearing up, he said the only thing he had said all along. Maybe a year later, war came to the region. It came the way war always seems to. Suddenly, and then all at once, soldiers moving through every village along the border, taking every young man strong enough to carry a weapon. They came to the old man's door too. They looked at his son, at the leg that had never healed straight, at the limp that would not go away, and they moved on without him. Almost every young man from that village was taken that year. Almost none of them came home. The old man's son stayed, limping, alive, sitting beside his father in the evenings, while the village around them grew quieter with grief. House by house, family by family, the war taking what it wanted and leaving almost nothing behind. No one came to the old man's door this time to tell him how fortunate he was. Maybe some of them understood, finally, what he had been saying all along. Maybe some of them were simply too tired with their own loss to say anything at all. We do this too, in smaller ways. Every day, something happens, and within seconds, before we have any real information, we have already decided what kind of thing it is. Good news, bad news, a blessing, a disaster. We attach the label so fast we forget we are the ones attaching it. The job you did not get might be the reason you found the one that actually fit you. The version of your life you were so desperately trying to hold on to, the one you were certain was the only good outcome, might have been standing directly in the way of something you cannot see yet. From where you are standing tonight, this does not mean everything happens for a reason. In the way that phrase gets used to rush people past real pain. The old man's son still walked with a limp for the rest of his life. That was real, even after the war made it. In some way, also lucky. Both things were true at once. What the old man understood was smaller and more useful than that. He did not have enough information to know, in the moment, what the moment actually was. None of us ever do. We are always standing too close to events to see their whole shape, judging a story before the last page has been written. This is what makes control so exhausting. We are not just trying to steer our lives. We are steering them by a story we are still writing, already convinced we know how it ends. Maybe is not indifference. The old man was not pretending not to care. He loved his horse. He loved his son more, and sat up with him through the worst of that pain. Maybe it was not a wall built to avoid feeling things. Maybe it was simply the truth. The most honest thing a person can say about anything that has not finished happening yet. Tonight, there might be something in your life you have already decided the ending of. A diagnosis. A door that closed. A person who left. Something already filed away as the worst thing that ever happened to you. Sealed shut. Decided you do not have to force yourself to see it as good. That is not what this story is asking of you. It is only asking you to notice the sentence you have already written the end of, and consider leaving it unfinished a little longer. A man hung between two tigers, one waiting above him, one waiting below. Two small animals quietly chewing through the only thing holding him there. And in the middle of all of it, he found a strawberry growing out of the rock. He picked it. He ate it. And it was, he said later, the sweetest thing he had ever tasted. There is a story about a man walking alone through the wilderness, on a path he had walked many times before. He heard it before he saw it. A low sound in the brush behind him. Something large, moving fast through dry grass. He turned, and there it was. A tiger, already closing the distance, already certain of him. He ran, not toward anything, just away. The way the body runs before the mind has time to make a plan. The ground fell away in front of him without warning. A cliff, sudden and steep, and there was nowhere left to go but down. He grabbed at whatever his hands could find, a thick vine growing out of the rock face, and lowered himself over the edge, the tiger's breath somewhere just above him, close enough to feel. He hung there, the vine taking his full weight, his feet swinging over open air. He looked down to see what waited below. Another tiger, pacing at the base of the cliff, looking up, patient, in no hurry at all. Above him, one death. Below him, another. Between them, a length of vine, and his own hands, already tired, already slipping a little with sweat. Then he heard it. A small, steady sound, right above his hands. 2 mice, one white, one black, had found the vine and begun to gnaw through it, the way mice do, without malice, without any awareness at all of what they were unraveling. Each bite was small. Together, they were not. There was nothing he could do about any of it. Not the tiger above. Not the tiger below. Not the 2 small animals slowly working through the only thing keeping him from either one. And then, just at the edge of his vision, growing out of a crack in the rock, close enough to reach, he saw a strawberry. Ripe. Red. Impossibly there, in the middle of all of it. He reached out with one hand, picked it, and ate it. It was the sweetest strawberry he had ever tasted. That is where the story usually ends, and it is almost always met with the same question. And then what happened? Did he fall? Did someone save him? What happened to the man? The honest answer is that the story does not say. That is not an accident. The story was never about what happened next. It was about the strawberry. Most of us live suspended exactly like that man, more often than we would like to admit. Something behind us we cannot undo. Something ahead of us we cannot control. Small, quiet things wearing away at whatever is holding us up right now. A diagnosis we are waiting on. A decision someone else is making about our life. A slow erosion we can feel but cannot stop. We hang there, and most of our energy goes into the tigers. Watching the one above. Measuring the one below. Straining to hear how much of the vine is left. This is not a story asking you to pretend the tigers are not real. They are real. The vine really is fraying. Some situations genuinely have no safe way down, and it would be its own kind of unkindness to tell you otherwise. What the story is asking is smaller than that, and much harder. While the tigers are doing what tigers do, and the vine is doing what a vine under 2 mice will eventually do. Is there anything within reach right now that is still sweet? Most of us skip past this question entirely, because it feels almost offensive to ask it. How can I think about anything sweet when there is so much to be afraid of? But the man did not choose between fear and the strawberry. He was still afraid. The tigers did not disappear because he picked the fruit. He simply stopped spending the entire moment on them. We do this to ourselves constantly, in smaller versions of the same shape. We are so busy managing what might happen tonight, next month, next year, that we do not taste the coffee that is actually in our hands right now. We are so occupied rehearsing the conversation we are dreading tomorrow that we miss the one happening in front of us today. The mind is always up on the ledge, checking both tigers, while the body sits in a chair with something good, something real, something entirely untouched by either danger, close enough to reach. You are not being asked to solve your tigers tonight. You are not even being asked to stop being afraid of them. You are only being asked to notice, for just a moment, whether there is something within reach right now that you have not yet tasted, because you have been too busy watching what is coming. The vine is still fraying. It was always going to fray. That was never the part you had any control over. The strawberry was sweet because the man knew the vine was already fraying. There is an old teacher who taught the same lesson with nothing but a drinking glass, and he did it so simply that people who heard it once could never look at anything they loved the same way again. There is a story about a monk named Ajahn Chah, who lived in a small forest monastery, and a student who came to see him one evening carrying something heavy that had nothing to do with the walk. The student's mother was growing old. Not sick. Not yet. Just old. In the way that arrives slowly, and then all at once. In the slight shake of a hand. The extra breath needed to stand up from a chair. He had started calling her every day. Checking. Watching for signs. And the watching had become its own kind of exhaustion. He had not slept well in weeks. He sat down across from Ajahn Chah and finally said it out loud. I am so afraid of losing her that I cannot enjoy the time I still have with her. Ajahn Chah did not answer right away. He reached over to the small table beside him and picked up a plain drinking glass, the kind used for water. Nothing special about it at all. He held it up to the last of the evening light. Do you see this glass? He asked. The student nodded, unsure where this was going. I love this glass, Ajahn Chah said. It holds my water. It catches the light beautifully in the morning. If I tap it, it rings a clear note. Someday, the wind will blow it off this shelf, or my elbow will knock it while I am reaching for something else. Or it will simply slip from my hand one morning when my fingers are not as steady as they used to be. He turned the glass slowly, watching it catch the last of the light. For me, this glass is already broken, he said. So when I hold it now, I hold it very carefully. I notice how the light moves through it. I notice the sound it makes. And when it finally falls, and it will fall, I will say, of course, that was always what was going to happen to a glass. The student frowned. How can you love something more? He asked. If you have already decided it is broken. Because I am not fighting with what is true, Ajahn Chah said. The glass was always going to break. That was true the day it was made. I am not the one who decided that. I am only the one who finally noticed it. Once I stopped arguing with it, there was nothing left to do but enjoy the glass while it is still a glass. The student sat with this for a long moment. The way you sit with something that rearranges a few things inside you without your permission. Your mother, Ajahn Chah said gently, is already the glass. She always was, from the moment you were born to her. That is not a cruel thing to say. It is simply what it means to love a person instead of an idea of a person who lasts forever. You have been spending your visits with her arguing with the one thing that was never going to change. What if, instead, you spent them the way I hold this glass, noticing the light on it, listening for its particular sound, not because you have given up on loving her, but because you have finally stopped fighting the shape love actually comes in. This is the part most of us skip past when we hear stories like this, because it sounds, at first, like it is asking us to feel less. It is asking the opposite. Ajahn Chah did not love his glass less because he knew it would break. He loved it with his full attention, precisely because he was not wasting any of that attention pretending it would last forever. The fighting is what costs us, not the loving. Think about how much of your own energy goes into arguing with things that were never going to be permanent in the first place. A job that was always going to change. A season of your life that was always going to end. A person who was always, like all of us, on loan. We spend so much of our care trying to freeze the water instead of drinking it while it is still cool in our hands. You do not have to stop loving what you are afraid of losing. You are only being asked to notice that the fear and the fighting are not the same thing. One of them keeps you present with what is right in front of you. The other one keeps you somewhere in the future, bracing for a version of loss that has not arrived yet, missing the actual glass in your actual hands tonight. Somewhere near you right now, there may be a glass you have been refusing to call already broken. You can still hold it. You can still love it completely. You can simply stop being surprised by what it was always going to do. There is a king who wanted the opposite of what Ajahn Chah taught with his glass. He did not want to remember that things break. He wanted something that could catch him both ways, on his worst day and on his best one, before either day had the chance to run away with him completely. There is a story about a king who ruled a wealthy kingdom and who suffered more than any of his advisors realized from the sheer speed of his own moods. Some mornings he woke certain of everything. His armies were strong. His harvests were full. He would walk through the palace with a kind of restless triumph that made the whole court move a little faster just to keep up with him. And then, without warning, sometimes within the same week, something would shift. A bad report from a distant province. A dream he could not shake. And the same king who had felt untouchable days before would sit alone in his chambers, certain that everything he had built was about to collapse. Certain that this feeling, this heaviness, would never lift. His advisors did not know what to do with him. He was, in truth, exhausting to serve, not because he was cruel, but because no one could ever predict which king they would be speaking to on a given morning. The one who felt invincible, or the one who felt like the whole kingdom was already ending. One evening, worn down by his own mind, he summoned the court's finest goldsmith. "Make me a ring," the king said. "I do not care what it is made of. I care about what is written inside it. I want words that will lift me when I am at my lowest. And I want the same words to humble me when I feel I have reached the highest point a man can reach. One ring. Words strong enough to hold both." The goldsmith bowed and left, and for days he could not sleep. He tried phrase after phrase. Words about courage did nothing for a man drowning in grief. Words about humility meant nothing to a man already curled up on the floor of his own despair. Every sentence he tried worked for one king and abandoned the other completely. He finally went to the wisest person he knew, a young woman who worked in the palace gardens, known for saying very little and for being right when she did. He explained the problem. She listened, pulling weeds from around a row of young trees, not looking up until he had finished. You are looking for something that agrees with the king, she said. That is why it keeps failing. Joy does not want to hear it will end. Grief does not want to hear it will end either. Find something that does not agree with either feeling. Something that is simply true, no matter which king is wearing it that day. What would that be? The goldsmith asked. She thought for a moment, wiping the soil from her hands. This too shall pass, she said. The goldsmith turned the words over. 4 simple words. Not comforting exactly. Not humbling exactly. Just true, in a way that did not care which mood was asking. He engraved them inside the band, small enough that only the king himself would ever read them, and brought the ring to the palace. Months later, the kingdom faced its hardest season. Drought struck the northern provinces. A neighboring army moved troops toward the border. The king sat alone in his chambers, the weight of all of it pressing down on him, the way it always had. The old familiar collapse beginning in his chest. The certainty that this was the end of everything he had built. His hand found the ring without him deciding to look at it. He turned it toward the candlelight and read the words engraved inside. This too shall pass. Something in his chest loosened. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to remember that he had survived hard seasons before, that the feeling currently flooding through him, as real as it was, had never once in his life turned out to be permanent, no matter how permanent it always felt in the moment. He got through that season. The drought broke. The army withdrew without a battle. And in time, the kingdom entered a period of such prosperity that the king began to walk through his own palace the way he used to, chest forward, certain of everything, forgetting, the way we all do, that certainty like this never lasts either. One evening, at the height of that pride, at a feast celebrating a victory that had made him feel larger than any man should feel, his hand brushed against the ring on his finger, and out of old habit, he turned it to the light. This too shall pass. The same 4 words, but this time they did not comfort him. This time they humbled him, gently, the way a hand on the shoulder humbles you in the middle of celebrating too hard. He looked around at the feast, at his own triumph, and understood that this moment, exactly like the despair before it, was already moving toward its own ending. Most of us only want a ring like this for the bad days. We want something that promises the grief will lift, the fear will pass, the hard season will end. We rarely think to want the same promise for the good days, because good days do not feel like something we need saving from. But this is where most of the exhausting grip comes from. Not just the fear that the pain will last forever, the equally tiring belief that the good moment has to last forever too, that we have to hold on to this feeling, to defend it, keep it exactly the way it is right now, before it slips away. The truth underneath both is the same. Nothing you are feeling tonight, whatever it is, arrived to stay permanently. Not the grief that feels endless right now. Not the joy you are afraid to lose the moment you notice you have it. Everything moves. This was true before you were born, and it will keep being true long after tonight is over. You do not need a ring to know this. You already know it. Somewhere underneath the part of you that keeps forgetting. This too shall pass. Not as a warning, not as a comfort exactly either, just as the truth. quietly waiting on the inside of everything you are currently holding so tightly. There is a kind of holding that has nothing to do with anger and nothing to do with control either. It does not ask you to steer anything. It only asks you to keep something alive that is already gone, by refusing, in some quiet room inside you, to let the fact of it fully arrive. Most of us know this weight. We call it missing someone. We call it not being ready. We call it simply not being over it yet, as if grief had a finish line we were failing to reach fast enough. There is a story about a mother who tried to do something that has never once, in the whole of human history, actually worked. She tried to bring someone back. She carried her dead child from house to house, asking every family in the village for a single mustard seed. Just one seed, from a home that had never known death. She was certain, if she found it, her son would open his eyes again. She knocked on every door in the village. Every single family had a seed to give her. Not one of them had a house untouched by loss. There is a story about a young mother named Kisa Gotami, who lived in a small town and who had waited a long time to become a mother at all. Her son arrived after years of hoping, after the quiet, private grief of watching other women hold babies that were not coming to her. When he finally came, he came healthy and loud and entirely hers. And for the first time in a long time, her life had a center to it. She built her days around him, the way new mothers do, without noticing she was doing it. The way you do not notice you have started breathing differently around someone until they are gone. He was barely old enough to walk when the fever took him. It happened fast, the way these things sometimes do. One evening he was warm in her arms, fussing the way he always fussed before sleep. His small fist closed around a fold of her sleeve. She sang to him the way she always did, the same 3 lines of the same old song, and felt his breathing slow, and thought nothing of the heat coming off his skin, because children ran warm sometimes, and mornings usually fixed it. She fell asleep beside him with her hand still resting on his chest. By morning, he was still. Something in Kisa Gotami did not accept this, the way grief usually asks a person to. She did not weep and collapse and let the neighbors come take the small body from her arms, the way the customs of her village expected. She held him against her chest and walked out into the street, certain, with the particular certainty that only shock can produce, that this was fixable, that somewhere, someone had a medicine for this. That death was simply a problem she had not yet found the right person to solve. She went from house to house, the child still wrapped in her arms, asking the same question over and over. Do you have medicine that can wake my son? People looked at her with the kind of careful pity you give someone who has not yet understood what has happened to them. Some tried gently to tell her. Others, not knowing what else to do, simply pointed her toward the next house, the next possibility, unable to be the one who said the word out loud. Eventually, someone told her about a teacher who had settled at the edge of town, a man people had started calling wise, though he never called himself anything. She went to him immediately, her son still against her chest, and asked him the same question she had been asking all morning. Do you have medicine that can wake my son? He looked at her for a long moment, taking in everything her question was not saying out loud. There is a medicine, he said. But I will need something from you first. Go into the town and bring me a single mustard seed. It must come from a household that has never lost anyone. A parent, a child, a husband, a wife, anyone at all. Bring me one seed from a house untouched by death, and I will make the medicine you are asking for. Something in her lifted at this. A task. A clear, doable task, with an ending she could already picture. She thanked him and turned back toward the town, moving faster now, something like hope carrying her from door to door. The first house welcomed her in. Yes, of course, they had mustard seeds, plenty of them. She explained what she needed it for, why it had to come from a house that had never known death. The woman of the house went quiet. We lost my husband's father this spring, she said softly. I am sorry. This house has known death. Kisa Gotami thanked her and moved to the next door. The story was different, but the shape was the same. A grandmother, gone 2 winters ago. A young man at the next house nodded slowly when she asked, and told her about a brother, lost at sea, before he was old enough to have children of his own. At one door, an old man invited her to sit while he searched his shelves for the seed jar, and he talked the whole time, the way people sometimes do when a stranger has finally given them a reason to speak a name out loud again. His wife had died 3 summers ago, he said. He still set 2 cups out most mornings before he remembered. He handed Kisa Gotami the seed without seeming to notice he had done it. Still talking. Still somewhere back in a kitchen that no longer existed the way he described it. Sorry, they all said, in one form or another. We have seeds. We do not have what you actually need. She kept walking. The sun moved across the sky, and her arms grew tired, and still she went from door to door, and at every single one, someone had a name they carried, someone whose absence still sat in a particular chair or hung on a particular hook by the door. A wife, gone in childbirth. A daughter, gone too young to explain. An old father, who simply did not wake up one ordinary morning like any other. By evening, she had visited more houses than she could count, and she had not found a single one in the entire town that death had not already visited. Every family had a seed for her. Every family, without exception, also had a grief. She sat down at the edge of the road as the light began to fade. The child still held against her, and something in her, very slowly, without any single dramatic moment to mark it, began to understand. This was not a problem only happening to her. This was not some unfair exception carved out of her life alone, while everyone else's families stayed whole. Every door she had knocked on that day held someone who had once stood exactly where she was standing now, arms full of something they were not ready to put down. She returned to the teacher at the edge of town without a seed in her hand. I did not find what you asked for, she said. I did not think you would, he said gently. I did not send you looking for a seed. I sent you looking for a house without grief in it. Tell me what you found instead. Every house has lost someone, she said. Every single one. Yes, he said. This is not something happening only to you. It never was. It is simply what it means to love someone who was always, from the very beginning, not going to stay forever. No parent, no matter how much they love their child, can hold that child outside of time. None of us can. She sat with this for a long while, the evening settling around her, and something in her chest that had been clenched since the fever broke, finally, quietly opened. She buried her son that night, properly, with the customs of her village, the way she had not been able to that morning. It did not stop the grief. Nothing in this story is asking you to believe that grief simply ends once you understand it is universal. What changed was smaller than that, and more survivable. She was no longer grieving alone, cut off from every other mother who had ever stood in this exact place. She was grieving as one person among all the people who had ever loved someone they could not keep. Most of us, in our own grief, quietly believe we are the only ones carrying something this heavy. We look at other people, going about their ordinary days, laughing at small things, and something in us feels betrayed by how normal the world continues to look while ours has stopped completely. We do not always say it out loud, but somewhere underneath the grief is a colder, lonelier thought. No one else understands what this actually feels like. It is easy, especially now, to believe this more than any generation before us has believed it. We scroll past the carefully chosen version of other people's lives, the smiling photographs, the good news, the highlight reel of everyone else's ordinary Tuesday, and it quietly convinces us that grief is something happening only behind our own door. It is not. It never was. Every one of those smiling photographs sits inside a house that has known loss. The same as every house Kisa Gotami knocked on that day. We simply do not take pictures of the empty chair. The truth Kisa Gotami found door to door is not a comfortable one. Exactly, but it is a true one. There is no house without a seed like this one. Every family you have ever admired for looking whole is quietly holding someone they lost. Every stranger you pass tonight is carrying an absence you cannot see from the outside. This does not make your grief smaller. It was never about making it smaller. It only means you were never as alone in it as the grief itself was telling you. You do not have to find the house that was spared. There isn't one. There never was. What you can find, instead, is everyone else who has ever stood exactly where you are standing tonight. Arms full of something they were not ready to put down either. The wound itself lasted a single moment. The story he kept telling about the wound lasted years. And it was only when someone finally showed him the difference between the two that he understood which one he actually had the power to stop. There is a story about a young man who came to an old teacher, months after losing someone he loved. He had done everything he thought he was supposed to do. He had cried when he needed to cry. He had let his friends sit with him in the worst of it. He had gone back to work, back to his ordinary routines, back to something that looked, from the outside, like healing. And still, most nights, he lay awake, replaying it. The last conversation, the things he wished he had said, the version of the story where he had somehow done something different and none of it had happened at all. He came to the old teacher not for comfort, but almost out of frustration. "I have done the grieving," he said. "I have felt it fully, the way everyone tells you to. So why does it still come back like this? every night, as sharp as the first day. The old teacher was quiet for a moment. Then he asked a question that seemed to have nothing to do with what the young man had just said. "If you were struck by an arrow," the teacher asked, "would it hurt?" The young man frowned, but answered anyway. "Yes, obviously." "And if, right after that first arrow struck you, a second arrow hit you in the exact same place, would that hurt more?" "Much more," the young man said. "It would be unbearable." "That first arrow," the teacher said, "is the loss itself. It already happened. It arrived without asking your permission, the way loss always does, and it left a wound that is real and does not need your help to hurt. You did not choose that arrow. None of us choose the first one." He paused, letting the young man sit with this before continuing. "But most of us, without ever deciding to, pick up a second arrow, and we fire it into the exact same wound, again and again. The second arrow is not the loss. It is what we do to ourselves afterward. It is lying awake rewriting the last conversation until it comes out differently. It is the question of what you could have done, asked for the 100th time. As if the 100th asking might finally produce an answer, the first 99 did not. It is the quiet, cruel thought that you are somehow failing at grieving correctly, because it still hurts this much, this many months later. The young man sat with this, something in his chest tightening, then loosening slightly, the way it does when you finally hear a shape put around something you have been feeling without words. "How do I know which arrow I am feeling?" he asked. "In the moment it is happening. The first arrow is simple," the teacher said. "It is grief. It is the ache of missing someone, the tears that come without warning, the empty chair, the silence where their voice used to be. It does not need a story to hurt. It just hurts, on its own, because you loved someone and they are gone. That pain will visit you for a long time, maybe your whole life, in smaller and smaller waves. That is not a flaw in you. That is love. Doing exactly what love does when it loses what it was pointed at. And the second arrow always has a sentence attached to it," the teacher said. "It sounds like, I should be over this by now. It sounds like, if I had only done this one thing differently. It sounds like, something is wrong with me for still feeling this. The first arrow is the missing. The second arrow is the argument you are having with the missing, the fight you keep starting with a pain that was never asking to be fought." The young man was quiet for a long time after that. Not because he did not understand, because he understood exactly, and understanding, in this case, did not feel like relief so much as recognition, the way it feels to finally see the shape of something you have been tangled in for months without a name for it. Most of us live almost entirely inside the second arrow without realizing there was ever a first one on its own. We do not just grieve. We grieve, and then we judge ourselves for how we are grieving. We do not just feel the ache of missing someone. We add to it a second ache, the belief that we should have moved past this stage by now, that other people seem to manage their losses more gracefully, that there is a timeline we are somehow failing to meet. This does not mean the first arrow does not hurt. It does. It is allowed to hurt for as long as it hurts, without apology, without a deadline attached to it. What the story is asking you to notice is only the second arrow, the one you are firing yourself, the one made entirely of the story you are telling about the pain rather than the pain itself. You cannot control whether the first arrow finds you. Loss does not ask for consent. It simply arrives, the way weather arrives, and it leaves what it leaves. But the second arrow is the one thing in this entire story that was always quietly in your own hands. Not because you are weak for having fired it. Almost everyone does. Almost every day. Without noticing. Tonight, if the old ache comes back, sharp and sudden, the way it does, see if you can find the difference. Is this the first arrow? The simple, honest grief that comes with having loved someone? Or is this the second one? The story layered on top of it? The argument? The judgment? The should have? You do not have to stop the first arrow from finding you. It was always going to. You only have to notice, gently, when your own hand is the one reaching for the second. Every villager who passed that stretch of the riverbank knew to expect it. Rain or shine, she would be sitting on the same flat stone, crying in exactly the same way, as if the weather had never once, in years, made the smallest difference to her grief. Her name was Old Mai, though by then most people had simply started calling her the Weeping Woman, the way a habit can slowly replace a name. Her husband had died young, leaving her to raise 2 daughters alone in a village where alone was a hard way to raise anyone. She had done it. Both daughters had grown, married, and moved to towns on opposite sides of the river, and Old Mai had been left with the small house they grew up in, and the long walk to the water she took every single morning out of habit more than purpose. On sunny days, she sat on her stone and wept. On rainy days, she walked out anyway, sat in the same spot getting soaked through, and wept just the same. This had gone on for so long that the younger villagers assumed it was simply what old age looked like, a sadness with no particular cause, the kind that seemed to belong to her, the way grey hair belonged to her. A traveller passing through one autumn morning found her there, crying under a clear sky, and could not walk past without asking. "Grandmother," he said, sitting down near her, not too close, "why do you weep on such a beautiful morning?" She looked at him with the tired patience of someone who has answered this question many times before and does not expect it to help. "My older daughter married a man who sells umbrellas," she said. "On a day like today, with no clouds, anywhere, no one in his town will buy a single umbrella. I think of her, worrying about money, and I cannot help but cry for her." The traveller nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "And on rainy days, surely then you have nothing to worry about for her." "On rainy days," Old Mai said, "I think of my younger daughter instead. She married a man who dries rice noodles in the sun to sell at market. On a rainy day like that, nothing dries, nothing sells, and I think of her struggling instead, and I cannot help but cry for her." The traveller sat with this for a moment, watching the light move on the water. "Grandmother," he said gently, "may I ask you something that might sound strange?" She wiped her eyes and nodded. "Why not think of it the other way?" he said. "On a sunny day like today, Your younger daughter's noodles will dry perfectly. The market will be full of buyers, and her stall will be busier than any other. On a rainy day, your older daughter's umbrellas will be the only thing anyone in her town wants. Every single day, without exception, one of your daughters is doing well. You have simply never once let yourself notice her. Old Mai went quiet. She looked out at the water, at the same sun she had been crying under for years, and something in her face changed. Slowly, the way weather itself changes, without a single dramatic moment marking the shift. "I never thought of it that way," she said, almost to herself. "I have been looking at the same two daughters, on the same two kinds of days, for years. And somehow, I only ever noticed the one who was struggling." She was not lying, and she was not being dramatic. She had genuinely never seen it. Every single day of her life, for years, had actually contained good news for one daughter, hidden behind the bad news for the other. And she had walked past the good news each time without registering it. Because grief, once it becomes a habit, does not need new material. It will use whatever is available. Sun or rain, either one will do. If the mind has already decided which direction to look, this is worth sitting with tonight. Because most of us have a version of Old My Stone somewhere in our own routine. A place we return to daily, out of habit, where we reliably find something to grieve, even when the day itself offered us something else entirely alongside it. We lost something once, a marriage, a parent, a version of the life we thought we would have, and somewhere along the way, without deciding to, we built a lens that has kept finding new reasons to confirm that same old loss ever since. The lens is old. It was shaped by something real, but it has kept operating long after the original grief that built it, scanning every new day for evidence that the world is still what it was, on its worst day, and somehow always finding it, because it was never looking for anything else. The traveler did not tell Old Mai to stop grieving. He did not tell her the sadness she felt for her struggling daughter was wrong, or that she should force herself to feel differently. He only asked her to notice that the same set of facts had a side she had never once let herself see. Both daughters, every single day, existed at the same time. She had simply been standing on the riverbank, with her back turned to half of her own life. You are allowed to keep noticing what is hard. That part does not need fixing. What might be worth turning toward, gently, tonight, is the possibility that some of what you have been mourning on repeat has another side sitting quietly next to it. One you have not looked at in a long time. Not because it is not there, but because you built a habit, a long time ago, of only ever facing the water where the bad weather was. Somewhere in your life tonight, on the very same day as whatever is genuinely hard, something else might also be true. You do not have to stop crying at your stone. You are only being asked to lift your eyes, once, and see what has been sitting on the other bank the entire time. An old monk sat outside his hut at midnight, wrapped in nothing but the cold night air, and felt, by his own account, like the richest man for miles. Ryokan lived alone at the edge of a small mountain village, in a hut so simple it barely deserved the name. One room, a mat for sleeping, a robe for the day and a thinner one for the night. A few bowls. Nothing that would have taken more than a few minutes to carry away, if anyone had ever thought it worth carrying. One night, someone did. A thief, desperate enough to try his luck at the poorest hut in the village, slipped inside while Ryokan was out walking under the moon, the way he often did on clear nights. The thief searched the small room quickly, running his hands along the shelves, under the mat, behind the few clay bowls stacked by the door. There was nothing. Not a coin, not a scrap of cloth worth stealing, not one object in the entire hut that would fetch more than a few pennies at market. He was still searching, more out of disbelief than hope, when he heard footsteps outside and froze. Ryokan stepped through the doorway and found a stranger crouched in the middle of his empty room, caught completely, with nowhere to run and nothing in his hands. The thief braced for shouting, for the sound of neighbors being called, for whatever punishment came next in a life that had clearly already handed him plenty of it. "You have come a long way to visit me," Ryokan said instead, his voice entirely without alarm, "and it would not be right for you to leave with nothing." The thief stared at him, unsure if he had heard correctly. Ryokan reached up, untied his own robe, the only good piece of clothing he owned, and held it out. "Please," he said, "take this. It is not much, but it is the best thing I have to give you tonight." The thief did not move for a long moment. Something about being handed a gift, in the middle of being caught stealing, seemed to confuse him more than any accusation would have. Slowly, he took the robe from Ryokan's hands, mumbled something that might have been thanks, and slipped back out into the dark, moving faster than he had moved coming in. Ryokan stood in the doorway of his own hut, wearing only his thin sleeping robe, and watched him go. Then he stepped back outside, sat down on the ground near his door, and looked up. The night was clear. The moon hung directly above the ridgeline, full and close, the kind of moon that seems to take up more of the sky than it should. Ryokan sat there for a long while, the cold air moving against his bare arms, and felt something that was not quite sadness and not quite joy, something closer to a strange, quiet fullness. He thought of the thief, already far down the mountain path by now, carrying one robe, small and thin, probably worth very little wherever he tried to sell it. Poor man, Ryokan thought, looking up at the enormous moon filling the whole sky above him. I wish I could have given him this too. A young neighbor found him there the next morning, sitting outside in the cold, and asked, half laughing, half concerned, why he was sitting outdoors, half dressed instead of sleeping properly indoors. "I had a visitor last night," Ryokan said. "He needed something more than I did, so I gave him my robe." The young man frowned. "That was your only good robe. What will you wear now?" "I still have this one," Ryokan said, looking down at the thin sleeping robe he had on. "It is enough for a man who owns almost nothing to begin with." "Doesn't it bother you?" the young man asked. "That he took it, that he came into your home to steal from you and left with something anyway?" Ryokan considered this for a moment, still looking out at the mountains, where the moon had long since faded into ordinary morning light. "He left with a robe," Ryokan said. "I still have everything he could not carry. The mountain is still here. The path is still here. That moon came back again tonight, the same as it always does, and he cannot take that from me, no matter how many times he comes back to try. Most of us build our sense of safety around things that were never fully ours to keep in the first place. A version of our life we had planned. A relationship we assumed would last. A future that felt, until it didn't, entirely guaranteed. And when it is taken, whether by someone else's choice or simply by time doing what time does, we experience it the way Ryokan could have experienced that missing robe, as a theft, as something stolen from a life that should have been allowed to keep it. Ryokan is not offering you a trick for avoiding grief when something real is taken from you. Losing a person is not the same as losing a robe, and no story about the moon will make that kind of loss weigh any less. What he is offering is something quieter. Underneath whatever has been taken, something remains that was never actually available to be stolen in the first place. Not because it does not matter, because it was never a possession to begin with. You may have had something taken from you that you are still grieving tonight, and that grief deserves to be exactly as large as it is. But somewhere close by, unclaimed by any of it, there is still a version of the moon, waiting to be noticed, that nothing and no one has ever managed to carry away. Everything so far has been about what happens outside of us. Someone who hurt us. A future we cannot steer. A person or a version of life we had to lose. In every case, the thing we were holding onto was something else. Something outside our own skin. There is a harder kind of holding. One most of us never quite name. Because it does not feel like holding at all. It feels like simply being who we are. It is the story we tell about ourselves. The one where we are the reasonable one, the capable one, the one who already understands, the one who does not need to be told anything new. We built that story for good reasons, usually a long time ago, usually to protect something. And somewhere along the way, without noticing, we started defending it the way we would defend anything we were afraid of losing. Tonight we turn toward that grip, not what life has done to us, what we have quietly done to ourselves, trying so hard to be someone worth keeping. A respected professor traveled a long distance to ask an old monk about a subject he already believed he understood completely, and spent the entire visit finding out just how full he already was. Nanin was known throughout the region as a teacher whose students left changed in ways they could not always explain. He lived simply, in a small house at the edge of a garden, and received visitors the same unhurried way he did everything else. The professor arrived on a cool afternoon, announced by a young attendant, and settled into the small tea room with the easy confidence of a man used to being the most educated person in almost any room he entered. He had spent decades studying philosophy, comparative religion, the history of contemplative traditions across 3 continents. He had read, by his own account, nearly everything that had ever been written on the subject he had come to discuss. He had not come, if he was honest with himself, to learn something new. He had come to see whether this quiet teacher's understanding could hold up against his own. Nanin listened, nodding occasionally, while the professor described what he already knew. He spoke of the traditions he had studied and the ones he found lacking. He compared one lineage against another, offered his own refinements to teachings that had stood for centuries, and moved easily between topics the way a man does when he has never once been made to feel unsure of himself in a conversation like this. At some point, without interrupting, Nanin began to prepare tea. He set a cup in front of his guest and began to pour. The professor kept talking, gesturing slightly as he made a point about the nature of the self, barely glancing at the cup filling in front of him. Nanin kept pouring. The cup reached its brim. Nanin did not stop. The tea rose above the rim, spilled over the side, ran across the low table, and began dripping onto the floor between them. The professor stopped mid-sentence, staring at the growing puddle. "Stop," he said, half rising from his seat. "It's overflowing. Can you not see that no more will fit in the cup?" "Yes," Nanin said calmly, setting down the pot at last, tea still dripping from the edge of the table. "Like this cup, you have arrived already full of your own opinions, your own comparisons, your own certainty about what you have come here to hear. How could I possibly offer you anything when there is nowhere left in you for it to go?" The professor sat back down slowly, looking at the tea still spreading across the wooden floor, and for the first time since he had arrived, he did not have anything immediately ready to say. This is worth sitting with, because most of us have walked into some version of that tea room, certain we already know what we came to hear. We do this in conversations with people we love, arriving so full of our own version of events that there is no room left for theirs. We listen while already composing our response, already certain of what they are about to say, already deciding whether they are right or wrong before they have finished the sentence. We do it with new experiences too, arriving at a place or a moment already filled with expectations of exactly how it should go, leaving no space for it to simply be whatever it actually is. The professor was not a foolish man. He had genuinely worked hard for everything he knew. That is precisely what made his cup so difficult to empty. It is much easier to let go of something we suspect might be wrong than something we have spent decades being right about. Certainty that has been earned is often harder to set down than certainty that arrived by accident, because setting it down can feel, wrongly, like betraying all the work that built it. Being willing to not know something, even something you have studied for years, even something central to how you see yourself, is not the same as knowing nothing. It is closer to what Nanin was pouring tea toward. Space. Room for something that has not arrived yet to actually land somewhere. Instead of spilling uselessly onto a floor that was already covered, you do not have to forget everything you have learned about yourself, your relationships, to your own life, to make room for something new to enter tonight. You are only being asked to notice where the cup might already be full, where a conversation has been happening in your head before the other person even finishes speaking, where a version of yourself, built carefully over many years, has quietly stopped leaving room for anything you did not already expect to find there. The tea is still being poured. It always is. The only real question is whether there is anywhere left inside you for it to go. A man ran until his legs gave out beneath him, trying to escape something that had never once, in his entire life, actually chased him. He hated his own shadow. It is hard to say exactly when this began. Perhaps he had simply had a difficult season, the kind that makes a person start looking for something specific to blame. and his eyes had landed. One afternoon, on the dark shape stretched out beside him on the ground. Always there, always following, never once leaving him alone. He hated his footprints too, the way they trailed behind him on every road he walked. Proof, it seemed to him, that he could never fully leave anywhere without evidence of having been there. One morning, walking along a dusty road under a high sun, he decided he had endured enough of it. He would simply run fast enough to leave them both behind. He broke into a sprint. His shadow kept pace beside him without effort. His footprints kept appearing behind him, one after another, exactly as fast as he could make them. He ran harder, arms pumping, breath tearing in his chest, and still the shadow matched him, step for step. Still, the footprints multiplied behind him faster than he could outrun their memory. He did not stop to question the strategy. He only ran faster, certain that somewhere ahead, at some speed he had not yet reached, he would finally break free of both. He ran past fields, past a slow-moving cart, past a farmer who looked up briefly and then went back to his work, the way people do when they see something strange but not, strictly speaking, their business. He ran until the sun had moved noticeably across the sky, until his legs had gone from burning to something closer to numb, until his lungs felt like they were pulling in less air than they were putting out. He finally collapsed at the edge of the road, in a small clearing, chest heaving, sweat running into his eyes. And there, sitting calmly under the wide shade of an old tree, was an old man, watching him with an expression that was not quite amusement and not quite concern. "You have been running for some time," the old man said. "May I ask what from?" "My shadow," the exhausted man managed, between breaths. "And my footprints, they will not leave me alone. No matter how fast I run, they are always right there." The old man looked at him for a long moment, then glanced at the ground beside his own feet, where his own shadow sat quietly in the shade of the tree, barely visible at all. "Come sit here," the old man said, gesturing to the space beside him. "Just for a moment." The exhausted man hesitated, still half convinced that stopping meant surrendering. But his body had nothing left to argue with, and he collapsed into the shade beside the old man. The moment he sat down, something strange happened. His shadow, so relentless in the open sun, thinned and softened in the shade of the tree until it was barely there at all. His footprints, made only in dust or soft earth, simply stopped appearing, because he had finally stopped moving. "Where did they go?" he asked, staring at the ground where his shadow had nearly disappeared. "They did not go anywhere," the old man said. "You were never actually being chased. Your shadow only exists because you are standing in the light. Your footprints only appear because you are moving through the world. The faster you ran, the more light you crossed, and the more footprints you made. You spent an entire morning exhausting yourself, trying to outrun something that was never following you at all. It was simply the natural result of being a person, standing in the sun, walking through your own life." The exhausted man sat with this, his breathing finally slowing, the shade cool against his skin after so long in the open heat. "All I had to do," he said slowly, "was stop running and sit in the shade. All you ever had to do," the old man said, was stop treating an ordinary part of yourself as an enemy. Most of us are running from some version of our own shadow, and most of us are exhausted from it in ways we do not always name out loud. It might be an old mistake we made, one we are certain still trails behind us in the eyes of everyone who witnessed it. It might be a part of our personality we have decided is unacceptable, something we work very hard to hide or outpace, convinced that if we could just move fast enough, achieve enough, become impressive enough, no one would notice it was there. It might simply be a version of ourselves from years ago, one we are ashamed of, one we keep sprinting away from, as if enough distance could finally make it stop existing. The harder we run from these things, the more evidence of them we tend to leave behind us. Shame chased hard enough turns into more shame about how hard we are chasing it. A reputation we are desperate to outrun only grows more entrenched the more visibly we struggle against it. The self we are trying to escape does not tire the way our legs do. It simply keeps pace, exactly as fast as we are willing to run. What the old man offered was not a way to make the shadow disappear forever. Shadows are a permanent feature of standing anywhere in the light. What he offered was something smaller and far more available. Stop. Sit down somewhere shaded, somewhere quiet, somewhere you are not actively performing an escape. And notice that the thing you have been running from was never actually chasing you to begin with. Whatever shadow you have been outrunning tonight, however far you have already sprinted, however tired your legs already are, there is likely a patch of shade closer than you think. You do not have to defeat it. You only have to stop long enough to let it settle. No monk in living memory had touched the far wall of the north corridor, and no monk in living memory had ever needed to, because everyone already knew, without checking, exactly what would happen if they did. Generations ago, a traveling artist had spent a season at the monastery and, in exchange for his lodging, painted a tiger on the plaster wall of the north corridor. He had been extraordinarily skilled. The tiger crouched low, muscles coiled beneath painted fur, eyes rendered with such precision that they seemed to track anyone who walked past, even in the dim light of a single candle. The artist left. The story about the painting did not. It began simply enough. A young monk, walking the corridor alone at night, mentioned to another that the tiger's eyes had seemed to follow him. The next monk who heard this walked a little faster past that stretch of wall. He told someone else, adding, without quite meaning to, a small detail of his own, a low sound he thought he might have heard, though he could not be certain. That detail traveled further, gathering weight the way rumors do, until within a few years, the tiger on the wall was no longer simply a painting anyone in the monastery believed in. Novices were warned about it during their very first week. Some refused to walk the north corridor after dark at all, taking the long way around through the courtyard instead. Even in rain, no one, in all that time, had ever actually been harmed by the painting. No one had ever seen it move. Not really. Not in the way that would hold up in daylight. And yet the fear had become so completely accepted as fact that questioning it seemed almost disrespectful, as if doubting the tiger meant doubting everyone who had ever felt afraid of it. A new novice arrived one autumn. young enough that he had not yet absorbed the full weight of the story, and old enough to be curious about why grown monks, men who had devoted their lives to sitting calmly with far larger fears, would take the long way around a hallway to avoid a wall. He asked the abbot about it directly, the way only someone new to a place is brave enough to ask. The abbot considered the question for a moment, then simply said, "Come with me." They walked the north corridor together, candle in hand, until they reached the painting. Up close, in the flickering light, the tiger did look remarkably alive. The brushwork so fine it seemed to hold real muscle beneath real fur. "Touch it," the abbot said. The novice hesitated. Years of second-hand fear do not dissolve simply because someone tells you to reach out your hand. "Go on," the abbot said gently. "It cannot do anything to you that it has not already been doing for years. All it has ever done is sit exactly where it is." The novice reached out, slowly, and pressed his palm flat against the wall. Cool plaster. Dry, flat paint, cracked slightly with age at the edges. Nothing more. "It was never alive," the novice said, half laughing at his own relief. "It was never alive." The abbot agreed. But the fear of it was very real, and very alive, for a very long time. That is worth noticing. A painting cannot hurt anyone. A story about a painting, repeated enough times by enough frightened people, can shape an entire monastery's nightly walk for generations. Most of us are avoiding some version of that corridor. A conversation we assume will go badly, though we have never actually had it. A judgment we are certain other people are making about us, though no one has ever said it aloud. A version of failure we have painted so vividly in our own mind, retold to ourselves so many times, that we have started rearranging our entire life around avoiding a hallway that was never actually dangerous to walk through. The tiger on that wall was real paint, made by a real artist, with real skill. That is what made it convincing. Our own fears are often just as skillfully made, built from real moments, real embarrassments, real old wounds, painted by people who meant no harm, repeated by us until we forgot we were the ones still adding brushstrokes. You do not have to believe the tiger is fake just because someone tells you to. But you might, tonight, consider walking a little closer to whatever wall you have been avoiding, and simply reaching out your hand. Most of what has been keeping you on the long way around has never once, in all this time, actually moved. He spent 9 years training his hand to make a single perfect stroke of ink, and at the end of those 9 years, he had produced nothing. Not one finished piece. Not one thing another person had ever been allowed to see. He had been apprenticed as a calligrapher since he was a boy, and by the time he reached his 20s, his teachers agreed he had more natural skill than anyone they had trained in a generation. His hand was steady. His eye for balance was rare. He understood, in a way that could not entirely be taught, how a single line of ink could hold weight, or lightness, or grief, depending on how it was drawn. And yet his workroom held nothing. Every evening, he sat at his low table, ground fresh ink, laid out a new sheet of paper, and began. Every evening, somewhere in the piece, something would go slightly wrong. a stroke would come out a fraction too heavy. A single drop of ink would land where he had not intended it. The spacing between two characters would sit, to his eye and no one else's, imperceptibly off. And every evening, he would fold the paper, walk to the small fire pit outside his workroom, and burn it, certain that tomorrow's attempt would finally be the one without a single flaw in it. Years passed this way. His hands grew steadier. His skill, by any outside measure, grew extraordinary. And still, nothing survived the fire pit. He had become, without quite meaning to, a man who created constantly and produced nothing at all. One evening, exhausted, his fingers stained black, another sheet already curling into ash behind him, he made the long walk to the house of an old master painter whose reputation stretched across the entire province. He had heard the old man's work described as flawless, and he had come to learn, finally, the secret of how a person actually achieved it. The old master welcomed him in and listened patiently while the young man explained his years of practice, his years of burning, his desperate hope that somewhere in this house he would find the answer that had eluded him for nearly a decade. Then the old master led him into his own workroom. The walls were covered, floor to ceiling, with finished pieces, scrolls of calligraphy, ink paintings of mountains and birds and old trees, dozens of them, spanning what must have been an entire lifetime of work. The young man moved closer to study them, and slowly, his expression shifted from awe into something like confusion. Up close, the flaws were everywhere. A blot of ink in the corner of one scroll, clearly unintended. A stroke on another that trailed slightly thin at the end, as if the brush had run dry a moment too soon. A painting of a crane where one wing sat very slightly out of balance with the other. "These are not perfect," the young man said, before he could stop himself. "No," the old master agreed, without any hint of embarrassment. "None of them are." "Then why are they on your wall?" the young man asked, "instead of in your fire pit?" The old master smiled, the way you smile at a question you once asked yourself, a long time ago. "Because they exist," he said. "Everything you have made in 9 years exists nowhere except in ash. I am an old man with far less natural talent than you clearly have, and my walls are full, because at some point, decades ago, I stopped waiting for a piece that had no flaw in it, and started finishing the ones that were simply true to the moment I made them." He walked to a low table, ground fresh ink without ceremony, and drew a single character in 3 unhurried strokes. Near the end of the final stroke, the brush caught slightly, leaving a small, rough edge where a smoother line might have been. "There," the old master said, setting down the brush. "Flawed. Also finished. Also mine. That small rough edge did not happen because my hand is weak. It happened because I am a person, drawing one particular line, on one particular evening, that will never come again exactly this way. A machine could perhaps make the line smoother. It could not make it belong to this evening the way this one does." The young man stared at the character on the page, small and imperfect, and completely alive, in a way none of his own burned attempts had ever been allowed to be. "I have been trying to make something that could not be improved," he said slowly. You have been trying to make something that could not exist. The old master said, perfection is not a higher version of a finished thing. It is simply the reason nothing ever gets finished. A piece with one small flaw, hung on a wall where someone can see it, has already done more in this world than 10 years of flawless attempts that never left your workroom. The young man returned home that night and sat at his low table one more time. He drew a single line of characters, and somewhere in the middle, his hand trembled slightly, the way a tired hand does, and the ink pooled a fraction too dark in one small place. He did not walk to the fire pit. He set the paper down, looked at it for a long time, and, for the first time in 9 years, let it simply exist. Most of us are keeping some version of our own life folded away, unfinished, waiting for a flawless version that was never actually available to begin with. The apology we have not sent because we cannot phrase it perfectly enough. The dream we have not pursued because we are certain we would fail before mastering it completely. The parts of ourselves we hide from the people closest to us, certain that, if they saw the actual, uneven, occasionally trembling version, it would not be enough. Perfectionism rarely looks like arrogance from the inside. It usually looks like devotion, like caring so much about something that nothing less than flawless feels acceptable. But somewhere inside that devotion is often a quieter fear, the fear of being seen clearly, flaw and all, and found wanting. The old master's wall was not covered in his best possible work. It was covered in his actual work, the only kind that has ever existed anywhere, made by real hands on real evenings that could not be redone. Whatever you have been folding away tonight, waiting for a version of it without a single rough edge, it might be worth setting down instead, exactly as it is. Enough was always allowed to be enough. The trap had no cage, no lock, no lid that closed behind anything. The only thing holding the animal in place, the entire time, was its own fist, and its own refusal to open it. The trap itself was almost embarrassingly simple. A hollowed coconut shell, tied firmly to the base of a tree with a length of rope. A hole cut into the shell, just wide enough for an open hand to slip through. Inside, a handful of rice or sweet nuts, placed there the evening before, left to sit through the night. A monkey would find it before dawn, drawn by the smell, and reach one hand through the narrow opening. The hole had been cut with exact care. An open, empty hand passed through it easily. A closed fist, wrapped tightly around a fistful of rice, did not. This was the entire design. Nothing more elaborate than that. The monkey, feeling the rice under its fingers, would close its hand instinctively, the way any hand closes around something it wants to keep, and in that instant, it would find itself caught, not by rope, not by any cage, but by the simple fact that its own closed fist no longer fit back through the hole it had just come through. What happened next was almost always the same. The monkey would pull, hard, panicking, the shell knocking against the tree with each frantic tug. It would screech, twist its body, throw its full weight against the rope, doing everything except the one thing that would have freed it instantly. It would not open its hand. By the time the hunters arrived, walking calmly through the early light with baskets over their shoulders, the monkey would still be there, exhausted, terrified, one fist wrapped around a small amount of rice it had never even managed to eat, entirely free to leave at any point in the last hour, and entirely unwilling to. A young boy, walking this route for the first time with his uncle, watched one such capture happen and could not make sense of it. "Why doesn't it just let go?" he asked, watching the animal thrash uselessly against a trap that had no actual strength holding it. It could just open its hand and run. Nothing is stopping it. His uncle knelt down near the shell, watching the monkey's wide, frightened eyes. "You are right," he said. "Nothing is stopping it. Not the rope, not the shell, only its own hand and what is inside it. But the rice is not even worth its life," the boy said. "It could find rice anywhere. Why is it holding on to this rice in this moment when everything is telling it to run?" His uncle considered this for a moment before answering. "In the instant its hand closed," he said, "the rice felt like the most important thing in the world. That feeling does not update itself just because the danger has arrived. The monkey is not choosing the rice over its freedom on purpose. It has simply never separated the two. To let go of the rice feels, in that moment, exactly like losing everything, even though letting go is the only thing that would actually save it." They watched together as the hunters lifted the trapped animal, shell and all, still gripping its small handful of rice, even as it was carried away. Most of us have a fist closed around something that is costing us far more than it is worth. And most of us, if we are honest, already know it. A grudge we keep gripping long after the person who caused it has moved on with their life, unaware we are still holding anything at all. A version of ourselves from years ago that we cannot seem to release, even though it no longer fits who we have become. A relationship, to Job, an old identity, something we know. Somewhere quiet and clear-eyed inside us is not actually serving us anymore, and yet our hand stays closed around it, because in the moment we first grabbed hold, it felt like something worth keeping, and that feeling has simply never been updated. The trap was never the thing keeping the monkey there. The trap only worked because of what the monkey chose to keep holding once it was already inside it. This is worth sitting with, because it means something important. If the hand is the only thing keeping you where you are, the hand is also the only thing that has ever needed to move. This does not mean it is easy. Opening a hand that has been closed for a long time around something that once felt necessary rarely feels simple in the moment, even once you can see clearly that it must be done. Fear does not release its grip just because logic arrives to explain the trap. But the door out was never locked. It never required permission from anyone else, or a change in circumstance, or the right moment finally arriving. It only ever required your fingers, uncurling, one at a time, around whatever you have been so certain you could not survive losing. Whatever is in your hand tonight, however long you have been holding it, however much it once felt worth the risk, the opening was always available. It still is. He hung in the dark for an entire night, arms shaking, certain that letting go meant falling forever. And when the light finally came, He found his feet had been close enough to the ground to touch the whole time. A traveling monk was making his way down a mountain path at dusk, moving faster than he should have, trying to reach the village below before the last light disappeared completely. His companion, an older monk who knew the trail well, walked a short distance behind him, unhurried, the way people are when they trust the path more than the light. The younger monk's foot caught on a loose stone near a bend where the trail narrowed against a steep drop. He felt himself go, that sudden, weightless lurch of a body losing the ground beneath it, and his hands shot out on instinct, catching hold of a thick root growing sideways out of the cliff face just below the path. He hung there, gripping the root with both hands, his feet finding nothing beneath them but open air and darkness. Above him, his companion's voice called out, alarmed, asking if he was all right. "I fell," the younger monk called back, his voice tight with fear. "I am hanging from a root. I cannot see the ground below me. I do not know how far it drops." The older monk knelt at the edge of the path, peering down into the dark, unable to see much of anything either. "Can you climb back up?" he asked. "The root will not hold my weight if I try to pull myself up." The younger monk said, "It is already bending." There was a long silence. "Then you will have to let go," the older monk finally said. "Let go." The younger monk's voice cracked with disbelief. "I do not know what is beneath me. It could be a drop of 100 feet. It could be jagged rock. I would rather hang here all night than let go into the dark not knowing." The older monk did not argue with him. He simply said, "Then hang there, and I will stay with you until we can see." And so the night began. The younger monk's arms burned within the first hour. The deep, spreading ache of muscles never meant to hold a body's full weight for long. He shifted his grip when he could, tried to distribute the strain, tried not to think about how much longer until dawn. His companion stayed at the edge above him, not able to help in any physical way, occasionally speaking into the darkness, just to remind the younger monk he was not alone in it. "What if I am wrong about needing to hold on?" the younger monk said at one point, his voice hoarse. "Hours in. What if I've been wrong this whole time, and there was never anything to fall into?" "You will not know until you can see," the older monk said gently. "Until then, you only have two choices. Hold on through not knowing, or let go into not knowing. Either way, you are living inside the not knowing. The only real choice is how tightly you carry it." The younger monk said nothing for a long while after that. His hands had gone past burning into something closer to numb. His fingers curled so tightly around the root that he could no longer fully feel where his skin ended and the bark began. Near dawn, the sky began to lighten, slowly, the way it always does, without announcing itself. Grey shapes emerged first, then color, then finally enough light to make out edges. The younger monk looked down. His feet, still dangling, hung less than the length of his own body above a soft slope of grass and loose earth. Not a cliff, not jagged rock. A gentle incline he could have stepped onto safely at any point in the night, if only there had been enough light to see it. He let go. He landed on his feet, knees absorbing the small drop easily, and stood there for a long moment in the pale morning light, looking up at the root he had spent an entire night gripping with everything he had. His companion made his way down the safer part of the path to join him. Neither of them said much at first. There did not seem to be much that needed saying. "I was so certain," the younger monk finally said, "that letting go meant falling into something terrible." "Most of us are," the older monk said. "The dark does not tell you how close the ground actually is. It only tells you that you cannot see it. And somewhere along the way, we learn to treat not seeing as the same thing as danger." This is worth sitting with tonight, because most of us are gripping something right now that feels exactly like that root in the dark. A decision we cannot make because we cannot see what waits on the other side of making it. A relationship we cannot release because we do not know what our life looks like without it. An old version of ourselves we keep holding on to, arms burning, simply because letting go means stepping into ground we cannot yet see. The fear is not foolish. Not being able to see what is beneath you is genuinely frightening, and no one should be told to release their grip carelessly, without care for what actually might be there. But it is worth asking, honestly, whether what you are gripping so tightly tonight is truly a bottomless drop, or whether it only feels that way because you have been trying to see it in the dark. Morning comes eventually. It always has. Every single time. In every night anyone has ever survived. And more often than any of us expect, when the light finally arrives, the ground turns out to have been closer than the fear ever let us believe. You do not have to let go before you are ready. But when you finally do, it may not be the fall you spent all night bracing for. Every time he tried his hardest to hold perfectly still on the rope, he fell. It was only when he stopped trying to stay still at all that he finally learned to cross it. A young performer had joined a traveling troupe hoping to learn the high rope, the act that drew the largest crowds wherever they stopped, the one where a single figure crossed a thin line strung high between two poles while an entire square held its breath below. He trained for months on a rope set low to the ground, learning where to place his feet, how to hold his arms, how his whole body needed to work together rather than any single part working alone. He was strong and careful and determined, and none of it seemed to matter once the rope was raised even slightly higher and the fear of falling became real enough to feel in his chest. Whenever the fear arrived, his instinct was always the same. He would freeze, both feet planted, arms locked outward, entire body rigid, holding himself as still as physically possible, certain that stillness was the only thing standing between him and the ground. And every single time, within a few seconds of that stillness, he would begin to wobble, then sway, then fall. Exactly the outcome the stillness had been trying so hard to prevent. The troupe's old master walker, a woman who had crossed ropes higher than most buildings for over 30 years without a single serious fall, watched him practice one evening and finally sat down beside him afterward. "You freeze," she said. It was not a question. "I am trying to hold my balance," he said, still catching his breath from the last fall. "The more still I hold myself, the safer I should be." "That is exactly backward," she said. "Watch me tomorrow, and count how many times you see me standing still on the rope." The next morning, he watched her cross, and did as she asked. He counted By the time she reached the far platform, he had counted 0. Not once had she stopped moving. Every step flowed directly into the next, weight shifting continuously forward. Nothing held rigid. Nothing paused. "I did not see you balance at all," he said when she climbed down. "I only saw you walk." "That is balance," she said. "You are imagining it as something you hold still, like gripping a cup so it does not spill. It is not that. Balance on a rope is not a position. It is a motion. It only exists while you are moving through it." "But if I keep moving," he said, "what stops me from simply falling forward?" "The next step," she said. "That is the part almost no one believes until they feel it. You are not holding yourself up on one leg while you decide where the next one goes. You are already falling forward. Every single step. The moment you lift your back foot. The only thing that catches that fall is committing fully to where the front foot lands next. If you hesitate there, trying to hold the old position a little longer, just in case, that is exactly when you go down. The wobble does not come from moving too fast. It comes from trying to keep one foot in two places at once. The place you already were and the place you are going. He thought about this for a long moment, replaying every fall he could remember, and realized she was right. Every single time. The fall had come in the moment he tried to hold on to his previous footing, while also reaching for the next one, refusing to fully release the step behind him before committing to the step ahead. "So the secret," he said slowly, "is to let go of each step completely, the instant I take the next one." "The secret," she said, "is that there was never anything to hold on to in the first place." "Not really. Each foot only touches the rope for a moment before it has to move again. If you try to make that moment permanent, you turn a walk into a standoff with gravity, and gravity does not lose those." He tried again that afternoon, and this time, instead of gripping each position, he let himself keep moving, trusting his weight to carry forward, releasing the back foot the instant the front one found the rope. He wobbled less than he had in months, not because he was holding on more tightly, because he had finally stopped trying to hold on at all. Most of us are trying to walk our own lives the way he first tried to walk that rope, gripping each moment as though stillness were the only safety available to us. We hold on to a version of a relationship long after it has already moved on, afraid that releasing it means falling. We keep one foot in an old identity, an old job, an old idea of who we were supposed to become, while also trying to reach toward whatever comes next, and wonder why the whole thing feels so unstable, so exhausting, so much like standing frozen high above a crowd, arms locked, waiting to fall. Balance was never a fixed position, on a rope or anywhere else. It was always a willingness to fully leave the last step behind the moment your weight moves forward, trusting the next place to hold you the way every previous step already has. You do not have to know exactly where the rope leads tonight. You only have to release the step you are already standing on, fully, so the next one has somewhere real to land. It was afraid of disappearing its whole journey down the mountain, and it was only in the final moment, the one it feared most, that it finally understood it had never been separate from anything at all. It began as rain, high above a mountain ridge, one small drop among countless others, landing on stone still warm from the afternoon sun. For a while it simply sat there, gathering with the others into a thin film of water, until gravity did what gravity always does, and it began to move. It slipped into a crack in the rock, joined a trickle, then a narrow stream, moving faster now, tumbling over smooth stones, catching the light in brief flashes as it went. It no longer looked the way it had as a single raindrop. It had become something larger, something shared, indistinguishable now from the water around it. And for a long while, this did not trouble it. There was too much movement to notice. The stream widened into a river. The river carried it past forests, under the shadows of old trees, past villages where children waded in on hot afternoons, past fishermen standing patient and still at the water's edge. It passed through countless hands, countless glances, countless ordinary mornings. It would never know the names of. Somewhere in all of this, it began to sense, faintly at first, then more clearly, where the river was heading. The land was flattening. The current was slowing, spreading wide and unhurried, the way a river moves when it senses an ending approaching. And ahead, past a final stretch of marsh, grass, and pale sand, it saw it for the first time. The ocean, enormous, endless, stretching further than anything it had passed on its entire journey. More water in a single glance than the whole river had carried in all its miles combined. It felt something then that it had not felt since it first left the mountain. Fear. If it entered that vastness, it understood. It would no longer be itself. It would no longer be this particular current, this particular small motion of water that had traveled so far, seen so much, remained, in some quiet way, recognizably itself the entire journey down. It would simply become part of something so large it could never be found again, never traced back, never called by anything resembling a name. It slowed at the river's mouth, hesitating, the way anything hesitates, at the edge of a change it cannot undo. And the ocean, vast and unhurried, seemed to speak, not in words exactly, but in the way the tide pulls gently at everything near it, patient, without force. You are afraid of ending, the ocean seemed to say. You have misunderstood what you are. I am a single drop, it answered. I have traveled so far to become this small, particular thing. If I join you, I will disappear. You were never a single drop trying to reach me, the ocean answered. You have always been me. Long before you fell as rain, you were already part of everything I am. You simply went for a long walk through the mountains, through the rivers, through so many ordinary afternoons, carrying a small piece of me along with you the whole time, calling it your own name for a while, the way anyone does on a long enough journey. Coming home is not disappearing. It is only remembering what you were, before you thought you were something separate. The drop, if it had still been only a drop, might have wept. Instead, it simply moved forward, the way it had been moving the entire time, and entered the water. There was no violent moment, no crashing loss, no instant where something ended and something else began. There was only a gentle joining, a small motion becoming part of a much larger one, indistinguishable now from the tide, from the depths, from every other drop that had ever made this same journey, down from every mountain that had ever existed. It had not disappeared. It had simply stopped being alone in the shape it had been carrying. Most of us are standing somewhere near the edge of our own version of that ocean, afraid of the exact same thing. Afraid that if we stop gripping so tightly to the specific, the separate story of who we are, the roles, the achievements, the carefully built sense of being someone distinct and important and easily identified, we will simply vanish into something too large to matter in. But this fear may be built on the same misunderstanding the drop carried down the entire mountain. That being small and separate was ever the safest way to exist. That letting go of the tight grip on our own name means ending, rather than simply remembering something far older and far larger than the name ever was. You do not have to solve this tonight. You do not have to understand it fully before you are allowed to rest. You only have to notice that every drop that has ever feared the ocean has still, eventually, gently, without exception, arrived home inside it. The mountain is far behind you now. Let the current carry you the rest of the way. Somewhere back at the beginning of tonight, there was a hand, holding something it could not put down. You have walked a long way since then, through a river Tanzan crossed without looking back, and an old teacher who let an entire hour of anger leave with the man who brought it, through a horse that ran away and came home twice, and a glass an old monk loved more, not less, for knowing it would break, through an old woman who learned that even her hardest days had another side she had simply never turned to face, through a mother who walked from door to door and found she was never as alone as her grief had told her, through a young man learning the difference between a wound and the story he kept telling about the wound, through a cup poured past full, a shadow that was never chasing anyone, a fistful of rice not worth a single hour of freedom, through a rope walker who learned that balance was never a place to stand still in, through a man in the dark, learning that the ground was closer than his fear ever led him believe, through a single drop at the edge of everything, finding out that letting go was never the same as disappearing. None of these stories asked you to forget anything. That was never what letting go meant. Not once. In 20 small crossings down 20 different mountains. It only ever meant the hand. Slowly, without force, finally opening. Whatever you carried into tonight is still yours to feel. The anger, if it is still there, is allowed to still be there. The grief has not been solved by a story about a mustard seed. The fear has not vanished simply because a monkey once got caught by its own fist. Nothing about tonight was asking you to arrive somewhere fixed and finished by the time your head finally rests on the pillow. You were only asked to notice, gently, again and again, 20 separate times, that most of what has been exhausting you was never actually the thing itself. It was the grip, the holding tighter than the moment ever required, the refusal to let one thing end so something else had room to begin. There is a space behind everything you have ever lost. You have been standing in front of it for a while now, arms still a little full, wondering if it is safe to finally set something down there. It is. Let your shoulders drop, wherever they have been holding on all day. Let your jaw soften. Let your hands, wherever they are resting right now, uncurl, just slightly, the way a hand does when it finally stops expecting to need to hold anything until morning. Nothing else has to happen tonight. Nothing else has to be understood, or fixed, or finished. The mountain is behind you. The current has you now. You can let it carry you the rest of the way.